it's really apparent how involved the issue of data for catalogs is. So we have a ton of information to cover in a pretty short time. So I apologize if in advance if I go pretty quickly. So we're going to do a brief review of the initial ONIX feeds. We're going to talk about manual data editing tools that are available in the system now. We're going to talk about some supplemental content that you can add, and we'll finish up with a look at some of the future plans for data usage that you can start looking at now in preparation for some of the new feature plans that are coming in CataList. So we'll start with the basics, ONIX metadata. Most publishers, and probably a number of you out there, already know that you're familiar with this. It's a data trading standard for the North American and international book trade. And it's the primary source of data content for CataList. So if you have catalogs on CataList, your company already produces ONIX files. So without getting into it too deeply, the process essentially looks like this. A publisher, or sometimes it's the distributor, will use a tool or an in-house process to create an ONIX file, and that contains all of the key bibliographic metadata about the books. They post that file to the BiblioShare FTP, along with covers and interior images, where the content's picked up and processed into the BiblioShare database. So the final step to get that into CataList is to create a seasonal catalog. So it's the addition of ISBNs into catalogs, which is what prompts CataList to go out and look for data in BiblioShare and then pull it across into the CataList system. Once a title is in CataList, data updates happen automatically. An ONIX file isn't intended to just be sent once. Prices change, pub dates slip, books are released, they get reviewed, they win awards, and eventually they will go out of print. So it's the ONIX files that communicate all of these changes. CataList automatically picks up any of the title updates that are provided into BiblioShare in the Delta files, and will update that information in CataList as soon as it's available. So if you want to know which ONIX fields are used in CataList, this is an easy question to answer. We have a document available. So there's the ONIX to CataList details. That's in the section called Resources for Publishers. So if you go on the Help link, you can go directly down on the Help link to the Resources for Publishers, where they have the ONIX mapping and all of the details for which fields get mapped into which locations in CataList. If you're a Webform user, we have even a better guide that actually shows you side by side the major data points in CataList and the Webform source entry locations, and tips and tricks that are linked in that as well. So there is a link here to both of those documents, but they will be in your follow-up data after this. I'm going to spend a little more time talking about the manual data edits and additions that can happen in CataList. So it's the next piece of the data puzzle, and one of the main ways that you can get supplemental data into the system. So there are a few ways to edit CataList records and add more data. So there's the direct editing tools in CataList in itself, and you can also submit supplementary data files. So let's start by just taking a look at the manual title level entry and editing tools, the types of changes and additions that you can make, and some of the challenges that those manual edits can have for data maintenance as you go forward. So with the editing tools, let's talk about access. So editing access in CataList is limited to users who are either account managers or catalog editors. And of course, you can only edit your own titles. So if you're viewing a title and you're not seeing the Edit This Record button, it may be that you need to be approved for an access upgrade within your account, or occasionally there's a case where distribution or sales representation has changed and we need to update the title relationships in CataList so that you can continue to access the editing tools. In either case, the CataList support team can help you identify and resolve the issue. Once you are in the editing tools, what the edit function allows you to do is to edit single pieces or small groups of data points and then lock them in CataList to override or complement the data that's in BiblioShare. So as you can see here, I can edit and lock cover image, title, list price, all independently from each other. Each section is an independent unit. But title and subtitle fields are locked as a group when edited, and publication date and publishing status down at the bottom of the image here, almost off the screen, are also locked together. If you scroll down this page, you can edit most of the key data points for a title record. So the data that you enter on the title page only ever affects the display in CataList. Changes made here never go back up the chain to BiblioShare. So it is important to note that if you want to make a change to a data element throughout the supply chain, the best solution is always to update your source data and then send out an updated ONIX file to all of your data recipients, including BiblioShare, which then in turn automatically will update CataList. So what exactly do the locks do? Essentially, the lock indicates to the CataList system that you want the information in that specific section or sections that you've locked to supersede any of the data that's available from BiblioShare. So during the system's nightly automatic process, which pulls in new data, everything in the CataList title record can be updated except for the items that you have specifically locked. And so where that can potentially become a problem is when data elements are locked but not maintained. So the edits outlive their usefulness. And the updates from BiblioShare should at some point be allowed to resume. So for example, if a pub date changes and is locked, that will lock out the regular ONIX updates on both pub date and publishing status. So future data updates are blocked and unable to flow through. So when should you use manual editing tools and when should you lock data? So there are three main scenarios where using the manual editing tools can be really useful. So the first is adding basic title data when the ONIX data hasn't been released yet. With major accounts making purchasing decisions and having meetings earlier in the timeline than ever, there can be cases where the titles need to be listed before the data is released, or key titles drop in and the data is still working its way through the usual processes. So when you need to fill in key advanced data, you absolutely can do that using the manual editing tools. In this case, you want to add the information in CataList, but leave the sections unlocked. There is an unlock all at the top. You can unlock everything. CataList will keep all of your manually entered data and images until we have ONIX data starting to feed through, at which point those ONIX feeds will automatically take over the updates. The second is when you have content that you want to add, it's not in your ONIX file, but there are reasons that you can't supply it in ONIX. So, for example, if promotion campaign, you have promotion and marketing plan data, but it's not supported in your ONIX output. It is an ONIX field, but your particular instance of ONIX or your creation tool doesn't support it. You can still manually add that marketing content directly into CataList. So in this case, you do want to lock the data in. So the rest of the fields can update, like price or publication date, but when those updates come in, they don't clear out any of the data that you have manually added. So an ONIX update updates the entire record, not just the price or pub date. So if you don't lock in the manually added promotion data, it will get overwritten if you don't lock it. So if you're providing data that's additional to your ONIX feed, do lock those sections in. The last case where you might need to make an update is where there's a material change. It's sort of mission critical to have this reflected in CataList right away. So maybe there's a legal reason, or maybe you have a major sales appointment that you need a change to be reflected in CataList for. There is a time delay between the time that a decision is made at a publisher to make a change to data and the time that the data is submitted out to BiblioShare, processed, and then updated to CataList. So some publishers only provide once a week, some even less. So if that processing time is going to be a problem, you can emergency lock it, but you should remember to unlock those fields once the ONIX is fixed. So if you're watching this and thinking, uh-oh, I've been locking a bunch of data, I have no idea what I've locked, I don't know if it's causing any problems. It's not a reason for panic. So there is a handy report that will identify all of your locked titles. So if you go into your settings page on the Reports tab, you'll find a handy Locked Fields by Title report. You simply select it from the drop-down and click Run Report. So the report will show which sections you've locked. So as you can see, for instance, if all of your titles have the marketing section locked, that might be your intent. If you've manually added that marketing data because it's not in your ONIX files, then those sections should remain locked. But you'll easily be able to see if there are titles with other sections locked that you might want to investigate. You can also export this report if you want to sort by locked sections or do some more analysis. And if you have a really large number of unlocks that need to be done, you can get in touch with us. We can probably help suggest the best course of action for you. So let's talk about other ways. So the manual editing tools are fine, probably sufficient if your list is fairly small, you have a reasonable number of titles to manage in a single title management kind of scenario. But if you have additional data available and it's just not feasible to go title by title, for those cases, we do allow you to send in a few of the data points via a file upload. So there are 2 files that you can post to the FTP for automatic processing. That's the marketing and related product files. And you can also submit notes through an upload, which you can do directly through the CataList interface. So we'll start with just a quick overview of how that FTP process works. The first thing you'll need is the file specifications. So you'll need to request those from us, and you'll also need to request access to the folders on the CataList FTP. So just contact us to get set up with those, and once you have them, you can start creating some files, and we'll talk about the 2 files just briefly. The specification document really speaks for itself. So when you have your files, you simply post them to the FTP, and that will start the import process. Files are typically processed within about an hour, and when the import's complete, any of the data you've manually loaded will show as locked sections in CataList. So again, this is really recommended for that scenario where you have data that you can't submit through your ONIX feed. The marketing file is pretty straightforward. We simply need the ISBN, the marketing content you want to add, and then your content will just populate directly into the marketing tab in the title detail page and in the scroll view. And marketing can also be pulled into the customizable PDF exports. A couple of tips for marketing content. You can use some basic HTML. You can add, delineate paragraphs, line breaks. You can add unordered lists. You can mark bold and italic text. Things you should avoid, and this is a general thing for any ONIX content or for any side-loaded content, avoid your div tags, headers, CSS, inline styling. Carriage returns and line feeds can sometimes be hard to see depending what editor you're using, text editor you're using for creating files, and they can be problematic for importing the data, and then if it gets into the system at all, it can be problematic for display. So sometimes we see that picked up unintentionally by a copy and paste process. Sometimes if you're copying from a web page or a PDF, you'll accidentally pick up some of these formatting tags. So it's just something to be aware of. The related product file is a little bit more complicated. So because related products populates a number of different sections on the CataList page, including other formats, also available previous editions and comp titles. And the reason for that is they're handled in the same composite in ONIX. So when we process it, we split out those items for display based on how they're related to the title you're looking at to make it easier to read when you're trying to just find the information that you want. So the details for how we map all of those relation codes into sections is in the ONIX to CataList mapping document that I mentioned earlier. But for our purposes today, whether you're adding or editing related products, either in the manual tools or using a file upload, and you can indicate which section you'd like your related ISBNs to be displayed in, but if you're locking that data, either through a file upload or directly, you're locking all of the related product relationships. So if you add and lock in some comp titles today, and later your company is going to be sending in the ebook or audiobook ISBNs to be mapped into other formats, your locks are going to keep the rest of those ONIX updates from updating into the sections in CataList. So it's just something to be aware of. Comp titles, I'll talk about in a little more detail, because it really is a key data point for CataList. So sales data subscribers on the publisher side, the data providers on the retailer side, they're going to see comp title performance numbers pulled in for all of the comp titles in CataList from the sales data system. And it's a huge time-saving feature for buyers and reps. So we really do recommend adding some of those comp titles. One of the things that we did recently was we added the ability for sales reps to add their own comps in CataList. So in addition to the publisher-provided comps, on the title detail page, publishers and sales agents can click on the Add Comparable Title button down at the bottom there to add their own comps that they think are most useful for the accounts they're selling to in the Canadian market. So the rep comps can be identified by the little person symbol in the far left column. And so that's handy to know who's adding comps. But this is a really useful tool if you're selling a line where you don't have control over the Biblio data feeds, or where there's no comps provided at all, or there are comps, but they're really skewed toward the US or the UK market. And so the reason I wanted to call out rep comps in the context of what we're talking about today is to really clarify that the rep comps they're not part of those locked record elements. They don't overwrite publisher comps. Publisher updates by ONIX or manual edits don't overwrite the rep entries. They're stored completely separately, and the rep comps are always shown in addition to the publisher's provided comps. The other type of file is even easier to add, much simpler than going to the FTP. The notes upload it is considered supplemental data, but we don't have to worry about locks because it's not an ONIX supported kind of field. It's something that is supplemental for CataList, supplemental for your catalogs, but not really not supplied in the same way. There's no other method of supply other than directly entering in CataList or using the upload. So if you have rep notes that you've taken in an Excel file or you've got from another system, all we need for CataList is the ISBN and the note content in 2 columns. And so the same issues, the same pieces apply. So in terms of HTML, if you want, you can add unordered lists and you can bold titles and so forth. So from my page, you can upload those notes directly into the system. So after you just simply browse for your file. Once you've selected it, you can load your private notes by just clicking Upload File, or you can check off to share these notes with recipients, and you can add recipients for shared notes. So either one of those scenarios can be handled in the notes upload. There is a good chance that you will see more file upload options being made available through the CataList interface. It is something we'd like to do more of, so watch the newsletters for updates on any future plans there. We're going to try and power through some of the stuff that's pretty exciting that we're working on right now and working on for future. So if you've been following our newsletters, you've likely seen that we've been talking a little bit about samples and excerpts there. So this is a feature that we're developing right now, and it is planned for release in the spring. So there are some types of content that we're looking for: samples, excerpts, tables of contents, reading group guides. These are some of the pieces that we're going to start with. We know that people may have more types. Let us know what you're interested in us supporting, and we'll see what else we can add to this content. So there are 2 ways to get samples and excerpts into CataList. The first is, of course, ONIX. So the other text composite in ONIX supports tables of contents, excerpts, reading guides, and we are already started pulling these in. A lot of publishers already support this. Other text is widely supported in the industry. It's pretty much universal. It's where your description and contributor bio often comes from. So when we launch this feature, though, you can expect to see a significant amount of content available right from launch, just from data that's already being provided in the ONIX file. We have added a second way to supply this content to make it easier for publishers to do without having to touch anything in their ONIX feed. So BiblioShare has the option to post to their FTP folder, where your original ONIX files get posted, to a special folder called Samples, where you can post PDF and EPUB formatted files with a ISBN _ and then the type, whether it's sample or guide or TOC. Post them to the sample folder. Those will get processed into BiblioShare repository right away, and that'll be something that CataList will be able to access and display on demand. So yeah, so once we launch the feature, I expect that our submissions there will ramp up pretty significantly, but you can absolutely start supplying these files now, and they will be available as soon as we launch the feature in the spring. Some other upcoming data priorities, so a little bit further down the road. It's going to be a very quick overview just because we're under such tight time constraints today. But these topics have been under discussion for some time on the standards side and with the bibliographic committee. So while they may be sounding new to some of you, it's really that it's more just coming to the forefront because we're trying to start using these data points that have been talked about for a while. When we talk to retailers and libraries, what they really want is regional data. It tops the list of all the data elements that are being requested. And there's two main types of location-related data that are really relevant to the decisions that are being made by purchasing and acquisition staff. So they're looking for information that clearly identifies books that are about or are set in specific locations, and they're looking beyond the basic Canadian contributor indicator to get more information about where authors are located across the country. So the first part of that regional data piece is subject, what a book is about, and it can also be applied to where a book is set. And so what several publishers support at the moment is the set of BISAC regional themes. So this is the current list of codes that apply to Canada. All of the provinces and territories are representative. It's serviceable. If you provide a BISAC regional code, we'll continue to pick those up and display them in CataList. You can continue providing them. But what I want to talk about is about the future potential. If you haven't yet heard about Thema subject coding system, it's an international system that supports the usual subject themes plus a suite of qualifiers like time periods and styles. But I want to focus on their geographical qualifiers to show how Thema is an improvement for subject description for regionally relevant titles especially. So where the BISAC regional code has a single option for Newfoundland and Labrador, the current corresponding Thema list has 12, so you can separately identify the island of Newfoundland versus the Labrador mainland. Thema supports about 180 Canadian geography codes, so it's pretty flexible. I think there's about, for the West Coast participants today, I think Saskatchewan has 8 and BC has 40 codes, so much finer level of detail. So there's 2 resource links that'll be in your follow-up email. The BookNet documentation also links on to Editor's standard documentation. They are the standards body that oversees the Thema standard internationally. But BookNet's involved through the Bibliographic Committee with the Canadian English Language National Group that puts together changes and advises on changes and edits for the Canadian qualifier lists for Thema. So we're heavily involved in that. Before we move on from subject, I have a quick thing to call out because it's related to subject and it's a little tidbit that we are getting asked for by a major retailer. So, and it did come up in the last Canadian Bibliographic Committee meeting. So that is person by subject. So it is a really useful data point to have available. It's already supported in ONIX 2.0, though not many publishers are providing it now. We're mainly seeing it in UK data and some of the academic presses. But basically what this supports is in the cases with, for example, of titles that are about a person, the person is not always indicated in the title or the subtitle. So in this case, we actually have 2 people that this is about, but we only have a last name, not first name. So what the person as subject composite allows you to do is add a subject with a person name, and you can break it down as person name inverted. You can use key name and names before key if that's what your company is typically using. But it's an unambiguous way to indicate that the subject of a book is one or more people. And it makes the data available for catalogers or sorting mechanisms at retailers. So this is something we have started pulling from data, from BiblioShare data where we have it, but just to be aware that you may get more requests for it in future. So jumping back quickly to the regional data track, the second piece of regional data that buyers are looking for is locations related to where authors and other contributors are located. And I know we're out of time, so I'm going to have to go really quick. So contributor place links locations to the contributors on your books. It's a field that allows you to tag right all the way down to town or city level and details how each contributor is related to the city. And so we are going to talk briefly about ONIX 3.0 because it is an ONIX 3.0 data point only, and it does take some time and investment. But you can say, you know, where a contributor resides in, which country they're a citizen of. And you can do that in multiple cases. So if a contributor splits their time between two cities, you can repeat the composite and link both cities to the contributor. So we are definitely going to be using this data in CataList. I would expect to see some interesting uses for it. And there's going to be, and the question is, you know, will there be more sideload data options? So the first thing to do is to get started with just finding out what you have available, thinking about how you're going to store that data so that it can be, you know, assigned to individual contributors, so that multiple places can be linked to a single contributor. And when we start getting those plans together, we will probably look at more data sideload options. Part of the issues with that is you still have to get the data and other people are going to want it. So yes, you can provide it to CataList, but ultimately other people are going to be coming to look for that data as well. Price and availability, I'm just going to mention quickly. Most distributors provide this already, but this is something else that we are going to be looking at, trying to provide some more on-demand, in-the-moment information about where to source titles, what the current in-stock quantity or status is. And so look for that, more documentation coming from the BiblioShare team on that very shortly, in terms of getting all of those data points in.